Have you ever noticed that you can perfectly describe the face of a stranger you saw for 3 seconds in the elevator, but you can't recall what your last thought was before picking up your phone? You can detect when someone is lying by the tone of their voice, but you don't notice when your own mind is fabricating stories about what will happen tomorrow. This is the great trap of human observation. We are microscopes turned outward and blind inward. Simone Weil, a French philosopher who died at 34, leaving behind insights that still disturb the world, said something that will change the way you understand observation. Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. But she wasn't talking about paying attention to others. She was speaking of something far more radical. Imagine that your mind is like a crystal prism. The light of reality enters from one side, and on the other side 7 different colors emerge. Most people spend their entire lives arguing about which color is the true one, without ever questioning the prism itself. The skilled observer does not fall in love with the colors. He becomes curious about the crystal. But here's the problem. 99% of people confuse observation with judgment. They think observing means cataloging, classifying, deciding whether something is good or bad, right or wrong. It's like trying to listen to music while shouting. It doesn't work. Zen has a word for this: Shoshin, beginner's mind. But it's not about not knowing, it's about the courage to not know yet. The difference between these two things is what separates the 99% from the 1%. The 99% observe to confirm what they already know. The 1% observe to discover what they didn't know they didn't know. The 99% observe to control. The 1% observe to relate. The 99% observe from the outside. The 1% observe from within the experience. And here's the truth no one wants to hear. You are probably among the 99%. I am too, most of the time. The point isn't to leave that statistic forever. It's to recognize when we're in it and know how to return. In the next few minutes, we will dismantle 3 fundamental illusions about observation, explore why our culture produces failed observers, and uncover a practical path to develop what Krishnamurti called observation without the observer, a skill that can transform not only how you see the world, but how the world reveals itself to you. Because in the end, the problem isn't that you don't know how to observe. The problem is that you don't know that you don't know. And that is exactly the doorway for everything to change. Let's do an experiment. Close your eyes and remember the last time someone disappointed you. Did you manage? Now tell me, did you remember what happened or what you decided had happened? This is the first great illusion of observation. We believe we see reality, when in fact we see our interpretation of reality. And the worst part is that this interpretation happens so fast, we don't even notice. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio discovered something disturbing. The brain makes emotional decisions about something 350 milliseconds before consciousness even registers that there is something to decide. This means you have already judged, classified, and reacted to a situation before even seeing it consciously. It's as if you had an invisible film editor inside your head, cutting, splicing, and adding a soundtrack to reality in real time. And you watch the edited film thinking it's a documentary. Meister Eckhart, a 13th century German mystic, had a brutal metaphor for this. He said most people look at God through a dirty window and complain that God is not bright enough. It never occurs to them to clean the window. But how do we identify when we are interpreting instead of observing? There are 3 infallible signs. First, speed. Interpretation is instantaneous. True observation has a quality of slowness, like honey dripping. If you understood something immediately, you probably didn't observe. You only applied a mental template you already had prepared. Second, emotional certainty. When we interpret, we feel a sense of satisfaction, a feeling of, I already know what this is. Genuine observation generates growing curiosity, not a definitive conclusion. It's uncomfortable because it remains open-ended. Third, the need to name. The interpreter needs to attach labels. This is anger, this is fear, this is unfair. The observer can remain in, I don't know what this is, but it's interesting. Here's an exercise that will break this illusion in practice. Choose an emotion you feel often, say, irritation. For a week, every time it arises, Instead of thinking, I'm irritated, observe, where in the body do you feel this? What temperature does it have? Does it move or stay still? What texture does it have? You will discover something shocking. What you used to call irritation is actually at least 5 different physical sensations with unique qualities that are constantly changing. What you thought you knew perfectly was, in reality, just a generic label stuck on top of a universe of subtleties. The Japanese philosopher Nishida Kitaro called this pure experience, the moment before the mind divides experience into subject and object, observer and observed. It's like tasting water for the first time and not having the word water to limit the experience. But why does this matter? Because when you observe without interpreting, something extraordinary happens. Reality becomes far more interesting than your ideas about it. And more importantly, you realize you have choices where before you only saw inevitabilities. The person who only interprets is trapped in a film they've already watched 1,000 times. The person who observes discovers that each moment is a different film, directed by no one, surprising until the very end. Here's a question that will mess with your mind. When you observe something, who is observing? The obvious answer is me, but if you investigate that answer for more than 3 seconds, it collapses, because during true observation, that me completely disappears. Think of the last time you were completely absorbed in something, maybe listening to music or watching a sunset or reading a fascinating book. Where was the you during that experience? Was there an inner narrator commenting, "Wow, what beautiful music," or "I'm enjoying this book"? Probably not. There was only music, only colors in the sky, only story unfolding. This is the second great illusion, believing we need an observer in order to observe. Krishnamurti spent 40 years trying to explain this. When there is complete observation, there is no observer. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The instrument of observation cannot be observed by the instrument itself. When you try to observe the observer, you create another observer, and then another to observe that one, and it becomes an infinite Russian doll. But our Western culture is obsessed with the observing subject. We want to be mindful, we want to practice presence, we want to observe ourselves. And so we create a spiritual superego that is constantly monitoring whether we are being present enough. It's like trying to sleep while paying attention to whether you are sleeping. Attention prevents sleep, and the effort to be present prevents presence. The Sufi mystic Ibn Arabi had a beautiful image for this. He said that consciousness is like a mirror that reflects everything perfectly, but has no color of its own. The moment the mirror tries to see itself, it becomes colored and stops reflecting clearly. But then, how do we observe without an observer? The answer is paradoxical. You don't do it, you allow it. It's like the difference between forcing a door and finding it already open. Let's try something together. Stop reading for a moment and just listen to the sounds around you. Don't identify the sounds, don't judge whether they are pleasant or annoying. Just sounds happening. Do you notice there is no you listening? There is only listening happening. Now try to add an observer. I am hearing sounds. Do you feel how this creates a separation, a division between the one who hears and what is heard? And do you feel how that division is completely artificial? Zen has a phrase, "When I am hungry, I eat. When I am tired, I sleep." It sounds too simple, but it is revolutionary. There is no I that decides to eat when hungry. There is hunger, there is food, there is eating happening. The I is a story told afterward. In true observation, the same happens. There is no observer who decides to observe. There is an openness, a receptivity, and reality reveals itself in that open space, like a flower blooming. There is no one forcing the petals to open. But beware of a common misconception. This does not mean becoming passive or inattentive. It is exactly the opposite. When the separate observer disappears, observation becomes total, three-dimensional, alive. It is the difference between watching a film about swimming and diving into the ocean. In the first case, you remain dry and separate. In the second, you become part of the experience, or rather, the experience becomes whole. And here is the final paradox. Only when you stop trying to be a good observer does true observation become possible. It is like happiness. The more you chase it, the more it runs away. The more you relax about it, the more naturally it appears. Now we come to the most subtle and dangerous illusion of all, the belief that we observe in order to transform something. Observe your anger to control it. Observe your thoughts to organize them. Observe your patterns to change them. It is a perfect trap because it seems so logical, so practical, so spiritual. But it is exactly like trying to examine a wild animal in order to tame it. The moment the animal senses your intention, it runs away or attacks. Carl Jung realized this when he said, "What you resist persists." But he went further. He discovered that when we observe something with the secret intention of changing it, we create an invisible resistance that maintains exactly what we want to transform. It's like trying to hold water in a closed hand. The more force you use, the more the water escapes. But when you open your hand and simply allow the water to rest in your palm, it remains. Pema Chodron, an American Buddhist nun, tells a story that illustrates this perfectly. She had a student who suffered from terrible panic attacks. For years, he practiced mindfulness, trying to observe the panic so that it would go away. It didn't work. In fact, it got worse. One day, she suggested something radical. Next time panic appears, instead of observing it so that it leaves, observe it with genuine curiosity. Become intimate with it. Ask yourself, what is it like to have panic? What gift might it be bringing? What happened was extraordinary. When he stopped fighting against panic and began to observe it without an agenda, the panic remained. But something fundamental changed. The relationship with the panic. It stopped being an enemy and became an interesting phenomenon. And when you don't fight against something, it loses the power to control you. This is the difference between manipulative observation and contemplative observation. The first wants results. The second is driven by love. Love in the sense of genuine interest, not the need for change. Spinoza called this intellectual love, a way of knowing that does not seek to possess or alter the object known, but simply delights in knowing it more and more deeply. Imagine observing a bird. You can observe it to capture it, to study it, to photograph it. Or you can observe it simply because it is a bird and birds are fascinating. The quality of observation is completely different. In the first case, there is tension, hurry, purpose. In the second, there is lightness, time, discovery. The same happens with internal states. You can observe your sadness so that it will pass quickly, or you can observe it because you have never really known your own sadness. How does it manifest in your body? What rhythm does it have? What color would it be if it were visible? Here is a powerful exercise. Choose something in yourself that you would like to change. A habit, an emotional pattern, a type of thought. For 2 weeks, observe this aspect every day for 5 minutes, but with one strict rule. You are forbidden to try to change it. Your only function is to know it better. Many people report something surprising in this experiment. When they stop trying to change something, it sometimes changes on its own. Not always, but often. And when it doesn't change, the relationship with it transforms in such a way that the change becomes irrelevant. It's like plants. You cannot force a plant to grow by pulling its leaves, but you can create the ideal conditions, light, water, proper soil, and trust the natural impulse for growth that already exists. Observation without an agenda creates these ideal conditions for organic transformation. It doesn't guarantee specific changes, but it makes possible a kind of change far deeper and more lasting than any forced effort. Because in the end, the greatest transformation is not changing what we observe, but transforming the one who observes. And that only happens when we stop trying to make it happen. We live in the first civilization in human history that treats observation as an optional skill. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors had to observe in order to survive. A broken branch indicated a predator. A change in the wind signaled a storm. A shift in animal behavior revealed migration. Today we observe screens, and screens are designed to capture attention, not to develop it. Mark Zuckerberg didn't wake up one day thinking, "I'm going to destroy humanity's capacity for observation." But when you design a system to maximize engagement, time spent looking at a screen, you inevitably create the opposite of contemplative observation. True observation is slow, not urgent, not addictive. It doesn't generate dopamine in rapid bursts. It cultivates a subtle and lasting satisfaction that is completely incompatible with the business model of the attention economy. Worse still, our formal education trains exactly the wrong kind of attention. In school, we learn to pay attention on demand to subjects determined by others during fixed periods to achieve external goals. It's like training muscles by always doing the same exercise. You develop specific strength and everything else atrophies. True observation is self-directed, open without deadlines, motivated by inner curiosity. It is exactly the opposite of what we practice during 15 years of formal education. On top of that, our culture values productivity above all. Time is money. Be efficient, optimize everything. But true observation is unproductive by definition. You don't observe a sunset to produce something. You observe because it's a sunset. The German philosopher Joseph Pieper wrote a book called Leisure, the Basis of Culture, where he argued that civilizations flourish when people have time for non-utilitarian contemplation. When everything must be useful, we lose access to what is essential. But there is an even deeper factor. Our culture fears true observation because it reveals inconvenient truths. When you observe without filters, you realize that most of your desires are not yours. They were planted by advertisements. You realize that most of your opinions were not thought out. They were absorbed from the environment. You realize that the person you think you are is actually a collage of social expectations, unprocessed traumas, and stories you never questioned. And that is far too frightening for a culture built on the illusion of individual control. That's why we developed what we can call defensive observation, a way of looking that confirms what we already believe and ignores what would challenge us. We consume information that agrees with us, follow people who think like us, avoid experiences that would question our certainties. It's like wearing dark sunglasses all the time and complaining that the world is too dark. But perhaps the most tragic aspect is this. Our culture teaches us that self-worth comes from doing, not from being. So we develop a kind of performative observation. We observe to look like observers. We practice mindfulness to look evolved. We meditate to tell others that we meditate. It's like going to the theater not to watch the play, but to be seen watching. You completely miss the point. The good news is that all of this is reversible. The capacity for observation is like a muscle. It atrophies when not used, but it strengthens quickly when practiced. And unlike physical muscles, there is no age limit to developing deep observation. But it requires a small personal revolution. You need to value being more than doing, process more than result, curiosity more than certainty. You need to rediscover what it means to be genuinely interested in something without wanting to possess it. And you need to accept that in a world addicted to speed, true observation is an act of rebellion. Rebellion against haste, against superficiality, against the illusion that life is what happens while you're busy doing other things. Now let's get to what really matters. How to develop true observation in a world designed to destroy it. I'm not going to give you complicated techniques or esoteric methods. I'll share 3 simple practices that, if done consistently, will completely transform your quality of observation. First practice, the wild minute. Every day at some random moment, stop what you're doing and observe for exactly 1 minute something that is happening naturally around you. It could be a tree moving in the wind, people walking on the street, water running down the sink, your own breathing. The rule is simple. You cannot choose what to observe in advance. You cannot have any agenda about what you should discover, and you cannot stop before a full minute. Why does this work? Because it breaks the pattern of directed observation we were trained in. When you cannot control the object or the purpose of observation, your mind is forced to relax into receptive mode. It's like making a tense muscle relax. Sometimes it needs an abrupt movement. People who practice this regularly report a surprising change. They start noticing that the world is constantly offering free shows of beauty and complexity they had never seen before. Second practice, resistance observation. This is more advanced, but incredibly powerful. For 1 week, every time you feel resistance to something, a person talking too much, traffic jammed, a boring task, an uncomfortable emotion, instead of fighting against the resistance or giving in to it, observe it with scientific curiosity. Where in the body do you feel the resistance? What physical quality does it have? Is it tight, hot, pulsating? How does it behave when observed? Does it increase, decrease, move, change temperature? Don't try to do anything with these discoveries. Just collect data on how resistance works in you. You'll discover that resistance is much more interesting and varied than you imagined. More importantly, you'll discover that when you observe resistance without resisting the resistance, something magical happens. It doesn't necessarily disappear, but it loses the power to control you. You may still have preferences, but you're no longer a slave to them. Third practice, perceptual pattern break. Once a week, deliberately break an established perceptual pattern. If you always walk looking straight ahead, spend 10 minutes walking while looking up. If you always listen to music with headphones, spend an afternoon listening to the natural sounds of the environment. If you always eat quickly, eat one meal in extreme slow motion. The goal is not to adopt new patterns, but to realize how patterns limit perception. When you break an automatic pattern, you suddenly notice how much you were on autopilot. It's like changing your route to work. Suddenly you pay attention to the path again, noticing details that had become invisible. But here's the secret no one tells you. These practices only work if you do them without trying to do them perfectly. The moment you turn observation into performance, you kill observation. It's like trying to be spontaneous by following a spontaneity manual. Spontaneity dies the moment you try to force it. So do these practices in a relaxed, imperfect, experimental way. If you forget one day, that's fine. If you do it mechanically sometimes, that's fine. If you don't feel immediate results, that's fine. True observation is like learning a new language. At first you mentally translate everything. This must be presence. This must be mindfulness. But after a while you start thinking directly in the new language. You stop translating and simply know. With observation, the same happens. At first you keep wondering whether you're doing it right, whether you're being present enough, whether you're observing or interpreting. But after a while, you simply observe, naturally, effortlessly, like breathing. And then you realize something extraordinary. The capacity for true observation was always there. You didn't develop it. You simply removed the obstacles that were blocking its natural expression. It's like cleaning a dusty mirror. The mirror always knew how to reflect. You just removed what was in the way. There is a Zen story about two monks who arrive at a river where a young woman needs to cross but is afraid of the current. One of the monks, without hesitation, carries her on his back to the other side and continues on his way. Hours later, the other monk can't contain himself. "How could you touch a woman? That goes against our vows." The first monk replies, "I left her on the riverbank 3 hours ago. You are still carrying her." This story is about observation. The first monk observed a situation, responded naturally and moved on. The second monk interpreted the situation through mental filters and remained stuck in his own interpretation for hours. The difference between the two monks is the difference between the 99% and the 1%. When you develop true observation, something fundamental changes in your experience of being alive. You stop living in a world of concepts about reality and start living in reality itself. It's like leaving a movie theater where you were watching a film about life and discovering that you can live life directly. Colors become more vivid because you are no longer comparing them to memories of other colors. Sounds become richer because you are no longer categorizing them as pleasant or irritating before hearing them. People become more interesting because you are no longer projecting onto them who you think they should be. But the deepest change is this. You realize there are no problems, only situations. Problems exist only in the mind that interprets situations as problematic. Situations are neutral. They are simply what is happening now. This doesn't mean you become passive or indifferent. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. When you see situations clearly, without the fog of automatic interpretations, your responses become much more effective and appropriate. It's like the difference between driving in fog and driving on a clear day. In the fog, you drive slowly, tense, always afraid of crashing. On a clear day, you can drive naturally, responding fluidly to what appears ahead. People who develop true observation report a paradoxical change. Life becomes simultaneously simpler and richer. Simpler because you stop complicating situations with layers of interpretation. Richer because when you remove interpretations, raw reality reveals itself as infinitely more interesting than any story you could invent about it. They also discover that problems that seemed enormous and unsolvable were, for the most part, creations of the interpretive mind. When you observe a problem without the armor of habitual interpretations, you often discover that there is no problem. There is only a situation asking for a new response. And there is another unexpected benefit. You become much more interesting to others. Not because you changed your personality or developed new social skills, but because when you truly observe people instead of interpreting them through your filters, they feel seen. And being truly seen is such a rare experience that people feel naturally drawn to those who offer it. But perhaps the most precious gift of true observation is this. You discover that you are never alone. When you observe without the artificial separation between observer and observed, you realize you are part of a web of invisible connections that has always been there. You realize that the tree outside your window is not a separate object you are observing. You are participating together in something greater. The sky is not a background for your life. It is part of the same fabric of existence that you are. This is not a beautiful philosophical idea. It is a direct experience that emerges naturally from observation without filters. And when that happens, you understand why all spiritual traditions at their deepest core speak of the same thing. The discovery that separation is a useful illusion, but an illusion nonetheless. The 99% live in the illusion of separation. The 1% live in the reality of connection. Not because they are special or enlightened, but simply because they developed the courage to observe what has always been here, waiting to be noticed. And that courage is available to you now, in this moment, in this breath, not as something you need to achieve or develop over years, but as something you can choose, gently, at any instant. Because in the end, entering the 1% is not about becoming someone different. It is about stopping the pretense of being someone you never were,